Hello and welcome to Really Cool People. This is a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people, folks that I've met and maybe some folks I haven't met, but folks whose stories are fascinating and interesting. The hope is that as you and I listen to these stories, we will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to someone who may seem ordinary, you may rub shoulders with, but when they get talking and when they share their heart and their life, we all discover, that they are a really cool person. Today we're going to meet Wren Bishop Luebbering, and Wren's going to talk us through the beginnings of her life. She's a relatively young woman, younger than I am, and yet she has a story that is true and gripping, and it knows it's been through some periods of darkness, and yet Wren talks about the hope and the light of Christ in profound, beautiful, and eloquent ways. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and let's listen to Wren Luebbering. Well, today it's our privilege to welcome Wren Bishop Luebbering. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, Wren, let's start with your story.
Okay. Well, I think the hot topic to start off with is that Wren is short for Lauren. And so many people who know me as Wren do not know that that is truly the origin of my story. My dad was named after Gary Cooper, who was a famous actor, and he named me after Lauren Bacall, who was a famous actress. And so I was Lauren for the first 18 years of my life and went to the University of Missouri as a freshman in college. And there were two Laurens and a Laura and a Lori on my floor at Christian Campus House. And so that day, I decided I would go by the name that I had wanted to go by since I was 14, which was Wren. For the millennials who are listening, there was a character in the Disney Channel show called Wren from Even Stevens, and she was a Lauren who went by Wren, and I thought that was just the coolest thing. But I have two kind of parts of my life based off of my name. So whenever I was born here in Springfield, Missouri on November 9th, 1989. For my boomer listeners and Gen Xers, that was the day the Berlin Wall fell down, was the day I was born. Mm-hmm. My parents watched the Berlin Wall fall down when my mom was having her C-section to bring me into the world. And from that moment, I was Lauren. I lived here in Springfield for the first 18 years of my life. My parents met when they were in kindergarten at Watkins Elementary School and were friends at Reed Junior High, and their first date was prom at Hillcrest High School. And so they met here, got married here. My dad went to law school in Topeka, Kansas, and then returned to Springfield 3 years later. But my family on both sides are here in Springfield. We truly are a native son and daughter of the Ozarks family, multiple generations. And so this is my home. I grew up on the north side of Springfield. I attended Truman Elementary School. And whenever I was a kindergartner at Truman Elementary, I experienced something that was life-changing for me at the time. So my brother was born when I was 3.5, and Kyle was the most delightful little boy. I remember really clearly him being born. I wanted him to be named Elvis because my mom loved Elvis Presley, but Kyle was born, and he and I played together and sang together and had so much fun when I was really, really little. And then there came a point when my brother stopped talking, and he stopped playing with me, and he stopped interacting with me as his sister. And my parents started noticing that something wasn't quite right when he was about 2 years old in 1995. The first person to tell us that something was wrong was a parent educator from Truman Elementary who told my parents that they should see a doctor for my brother. Kyle was diagnosed when he was 2.5 with autism. And at the time in the 90s, the terminology they used was low functioning autism. My brother essentially became nonverbal and was unable to communicate effectively with any of us in our family. And we went through the 90s as a family in Springfield with a special needs child with very few resources. There are so many great nonprofits in Springfield now who facilitate next steps and resources and support for families with special needs children. But in the 90s, it didn't exist. And so I remember a good chunk of my childhood, we would do therapies on a wish and a prayer that something would get better. We were gluten-free for a year. I remember my brother doing swim therapy at Drury University. I remember doing allergy shots in Kansas City and driving all the way up and listening to Disney music while we waited for my brother to have over 100 shots in his arm. I remember a therapist who came to our house and had magnetic tiles on my brother's head to maybe stimulate his brain to be able to communicate. There were a lot of things that my parents did to try to mitigate my brother's disability and to help him be able to communicate. And at this point, I was 5 to 10 years old in elementary school, and my brother eventually became a kindergartner at the same school as me. And when he joined me at Truman, there was just a complete lack of understanding of what it even meant to have autism among my peers. And so some of my friends at school stopped playing with me because they thought autism was contagious. And so the lack of understanding of autism was something that we dealt with as a family. And that was a difficult time for us. And that was also the really beginning of my faith. Many children who were raised in the church, and I was at Northside Christian Church, begin their faith in elementary school, learning about the miracles, learning about the flood, learning about the miracles that Jesus did, the great stories of the Old Testament, and the great triumph of God is what is the foundation for children often with their faith. And while I was learning those stories, I was also learning that God answers prayers. And I would pray every week at church and Sunday school for my brother to become normal, for the autism to go away. And over again, God did not answer our prayer as a family for my brother's diagnosis to recede. And so my brother got older. My brother became more aggressive, which was difficult for us as a family. And his diagnosis and his disability became the centerpiece of my childhood. We navigated it as best we could. I still went to national parks. I still went on family vacations with my parents. We still had beautiful Christmas mornings. But my brother's disability was the main character in every story. And so when you're a child of a family navigating a crisis every day, you become secondary in the story. And I became, at about 11 or 12, very, very lost, very hopeless, and really, really beside myself in my understanding of the world. My best friend, my childhood best friend, moved away when we were 12, and she moved to Arizona, which to a 12-year-old is, another planet. And on June 22nd, which was her birthday that year when I was 12, I tried to commit suicide when I was 12 years old because I had no understanding that things would get better. My brother at the time was 9, and he had started not just being aggressive, but being aggressive with me and attacking my mom physically. And so there was no way out. My parents understood that I needed help, and they got me help. To their credit and their wisdom, they got me professional help. I was at my pediatrician the next day. I was in emergency therapy the next week. I saw a therapist on a weekly basis for a couple of years. I saw a therapist for years on a monthly basis all through my teenage years. And that really culminated to a young woman at 17 who had clarity in what she wanted to do and that she wanted to get out of the home. It was not an escape. It was a way to find myself where I was the main character in the story. And so I went to Columbia in fall of 2008 and attended the University of Missouri School of Journalism. I was a writer. I had always been writing stories ever since I was very, very little. My mom still has my first one, which was a short story about horses, which I'm allergic to, which is deliciously ironic. But I went to Mizzou and became Wren. And that was the second part of my life, was becoming Wren who wasn't defined by her brother's disability, Wren who could go and have fun with her friends and not have to explain why she needed to be home to help with her mother or her family's crisis, Wren who wanted a career and wanted to travel and could do big things and achieve big things. And that's what I did in journalism school. I wanted to get all the way out, and so I studied abroad in Brussels, Belgium, the summer of my junior year, because also as a part of my fantasy of finding a new life for myself was that I had always wanted to live in Europe, and I did for a summer. And it was amazing, and I had a wonderful time. And then I missed Dr. Pepper and Driveways and my mom and the Ozarks. And so my dream came true and I needed a new dream. And that summer I found myself at 21 knowing that I wanted to be a person who loved what they did and loved to be with who they were with. And so I pursued a degree in magazine writing to work for a lifestyle publication. And I knew that I wanted to find a partner to have that life with. So December 23rd of 2011, I downloaded a dating app called OkCupid and proceeded to start messaging a variety of people who were interested in me. And one of them was Kevin. And our first date was on January 9th, 2012, where we watched an NFL playoff game together at a Buffalo Wild Wings. And it was a really awkward first date, but he texted me right after it and made me laugh and just kept texting me and making me laugh. And then by February, we were together and I graduated from college that May, turned down a job offer in Florida because he had one more year of law school and I thought he might be my person. And he was. He got a job in Springfield. We moved back home. After he proposed to me, I made the decision to pursue jobs back here in Springfield after living in Columbia for 6 years. Moved back in with my parents for 6 delightful months and got married in May of 2014. Then we had our honeymoon, moved in together, and that was 10 years ago this May, which is wild to think about. And then the third part of our story begins, which was we had a marriage that was beautiful and exciting and wonderful. And 2 years into it, we wanted to start a family. And that became hard. I discovered that pregnancy is easy to attain and impossible to reach often. And after a year and a half, I was able to conceive and had a miscarriage. 6 months after that, of longing for a baby, I had another miscarriage, and we sought out doctors who determined that I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. 1 in 6 women in America struggle with this diagnosis, and 1 in 5 couples in America struggle with infertility, and we became that statistic. After a year of fertility treatments, we were able to conceive our miracle. Elijah Michael was born February 5th, 2019. He was the prince who was promised, and we came up with his name on Kevin and I's third date. We were going to have an Eli. And then a delightful year with him, making memories, so excited. And we wanted to have more children. That was always our goal. And we thought that we had cracked the code. We had had our baby. I was able to deliver him. And then we discovered that as you age, at this point, I'm 31, PCOS becomes even more difficult to overcome. And so to conceive again would be even more difficult and challenging. So I reached out to our fertility doctors for next level treatment. Impossible, improbable, not likely, $2,500 a month in cash to be able to do fertility treatments. And in March of 2022, we had done 5 cycles of what's called IUI with letrozole and estrogen boosting medication. That's a podcast in itself. But I was able to hold on for one last cycle. My lining was terrible. My numbers were terrible. It was not looking good. But we did one last IUI on St. Patrick's Day, 2022. And 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. My doctor, when I went back for my scan, told me that there was a 2% chance of me conceiving her. And Evelyn Margaret was born December 2nd, 2022. Evelyn means wished for child. And she just turned 1 year old. And we are so, so elated with the joy that she brings to our family. There have been periods of hopelessness in my life, and we overcome them over and over again. But I have been in the darkness and I have been in the light. And right now the sun is shining so bright, and it's a glorious place to be. But I hold fast to his promises, and we'll see what the next chapter brings.
That is a
It's an odyssey.
that is an odyssey. That's a great term for what you just unpacked, and you did it with a lot of grace and a lot of beautiful elocution that is just it's delightful to listen to. But my golly, there's a lot of darkness in there that you had to deal with and address and move through as a kid and as a young adult. And it's great that you're able to come to that place where you're like, I'm living in the light, and that light is shining bright in my life right now. So in this format, we like to go back and explore some things that you touched on. Much of your early story, I mean, you talked about how it was so great to have, your brother and a baby brother, and then 2 comes, and then that becomes like the centering piece of your world, and the major experience. And, you unpack that for a great deal of time. And, you expressed along there that it's like, it's hard to see who you were or who you were becoming. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if you can go back in and peer into some of those spaces and identify some of the delights that were there, that were accompanying you, that were like the Lord gave you strength, or there were like just delightful moments that kept you moving forward. Mm-hmm. And you're gonna be like hints, and maybe they were just hints of like who you were to become later on. Yeah. Like things you were like, I think I'm good at this, or this gives me a lot of joy.
I have several instances of that are clear. Kevin, my husband, likes to say that God speaks to me very directly because I need it. And so whenever I was an elementary school student, I found myself writing as a way to express how I was feeling. But I also found myself writing because it felt good and I was good at it. I think that writing and communication is my spiritual gift that was given to me from the Lord, I think very clearly when I was born, because to toot my own horn in this dark conversation, I'm a very good writer. And so when I was in 5th grade, I wrote a poem about the Revolutionary War that was included in the Missouri 5th grade poetry anthology for the state of Missouri. So I was an award-winning writer when I was like 11. And that was very affirming to me as a child, like, I'm good at this. Like, I'm very good at this. And as someone who maybe was seeking praise from other sources, having clarity in my strength was very affirming to me that God had a purpose and a plan for my life. My parents were also very, very encouraging that I had this skill that I was very good at, and they let me chase it. And so I started writing from a very early age. For the millennial listeners, I wrote a lot of fan fiction for Harry Potter, which is kind of a Ren deep cut, but I did. And my parents would let me write whatever I wanted. There was a real encouragement to be creative. And my teachers in elementary school, I remember specifically Marcia Hansen, who was my reading teacher at Pleasant View Middle School. She encouraged me that I was a great writer. Miss Miller also encouraged me that I was a great writer. And in a dark time in my life, having sources from adults who weren't related to me telling me that I was good at something was something that was kind of a way thread through those dark times, because I could always fall back on that I was really, really good at this. And then also by the time I was at the end of middle school, I figured out that I was really good at technology. I was building websites for fun. I was good at social media early on in high school. MySpace, Zanga, LiveJournal. I was really good at all of that.
Well, that was just a bit of a journey through.
Right. Kind of the history of the internet there.
That's right.
But I was gravitating toward that, and I was really good at it. And then the centerpiece of that was when I was a junior in high school, I participated in Hillcrest High School's media program, HTV Magazine. Coach Davis, who's a prolific teacher on the Hill, still to this day, encouraged me to be a writer. He said, "You're a good writer and you should be writing." That's what he would always tell me. And I was entered into a broadcast news writing competition at a national contest. I had 2 hours to take 6 news articles from the AP Wire and turn it into a 2-minute anchor script. I had no practice. There wasn't really a way to practice for that competition. And I won second in the nation. And I was also the first person in that contest by a lot to be done. And that was very affirming to me to receive that national recognition. And so those moments of affirmation from God and from others that this is a strength of mine, this is a skill, and this is your calling was something as a achiever naturally helped me find my way through.
Yeah, it's incredible how you reflect on, and you mentioned so many people who were a part of your life from the community who were unrelated but yet affirming gifts, strengths, capacities that you had. And I think every kid who thrives needs people like that in their life.
Definitely.
One of the source, also in your early story, you talk about being ostracized. You talk about this sense of suffering, the sense of like being driven to the therapies and all those things. And so that was happening to you. It was also happening to your parents.
Absolutely it was.
And as you reflect, like here you are now, a mom with 2 kids.
Yes. Praise God.
Yeah. How do you reflect upon what your parents were going through? And what were some of the strengths or maybe even strength that showed up as suffering at the time, but strengths that became like gifts that they've imparted into your life?
Jason, thank you so much for that question. Because often whenever I share my story of my childhood, which feels very dark and also potentially places unintended blame on my parents, I want it to be so clear that my parents were doing the best they possibly could in a situation that was impossible to do well. I have great clarity of that now as a 34-year-old woman and mother myself. They just celebrated this June their 40th wedding anniversary. We know statistically that in America, if you have a child with a severe disability, the rate of divorce among married couples is 89%. And my parents did their absolute best to continue to invest in each other, to make their marriage a priority. And then also, for me, they knew that there was a challenge that was in our family they could not remove from me. My brother was in our family. He still is in our family. And so they knew they had to make intentional spaces where I could be just an 8-year-old or just a 13-year-old. When I was little and my brother was on a gluten-free diet in our home to make things easier on my brother and the situation my mom was trying to cook within, I would go out to dinner with my grandparents often. Gran and Papa would come pick me up. We would go get some burgers because I was a kid and I wanted a Happy Meal. Whenever I was 12 or 13, I wanted to do experiences within the community. My mom was really quick to ensure that I was able to go out and experience those with my friends. When I was in high school and there were opportunities to travel just for fun and not just in a minivan as we see the country go by, because that's the only way a child with significant disabilities can see the country and travel. I was able to go. My parents were enthusiastic in their support of me being able to travel and have those experiences. But also they knew that I needed more adults in my life to love on me. My Aunt Julie, my mom's older sister, was like a second mom, and she would come and take me away and we would go do something together. We would read books. We would just talk in a parking lot. And Gran, my mother's mother, also would listen anytime that I just needed to unload emotionally about a situation again that was impossible. My parents, even though we were in deep conflict at the time and I felt like a victim of my own family, they kept showing up. They kept making sure that there were babysitters for my brother, so to help with childcare with my mom, so that I didn't become the third parent. They kept showing up and investing in resources in their marriage, childcare for them to be able to go out of town. They did that because they knew that they needed to invest in themselves or they would come apart within the houses on fire of our everyday lives. I spent a week with my Grammy in Chillicothe, Missouri every summer because I just needed to be a kid sometimes without the burden of it. And my parents made these intentional decisions to ensure that there was a layer of protection around me all the time. And I come now to a place of gratitude for that because I know that my mom was just doing her best and my dad was doing his best. They're incredible grandparents and they were wonderful parents in an impossible situation.
Thanks for sharing. Have you been asked to share your story in other places? Do very many people know the full extent of your story?
That is a complicated question. My parents come from a generation, and Mom, I'm sure you're listening. My parents come from a generation where oftentimes special needs adults or family problems, let's put in quotations, or hard things, let's put in all caps, we don't talk about. And so my parents have always been very protective of their own story about our family. And in honoring them, I have not been as vocal about my story outside of my specific friend circle. Out of respect for their preferences. I think Mom and Dad, as my brother now is 30 and thriving within his own independent living situation and is having the highest quality of life possible for himself, they are more open to me sharing specific details of my experience as a child. But there was a while it was almost too close. And I respect that. But as we gain distance and time, I've been sharing more and more frequently. There was an article in the magazine that we put out at the University of Missouri where I talked about how to navigate being the older sibling of a special needs child. I also wrote a letter to the editor to Elle magazine when I was a senior in high school because they talked about how 90s autism children were becoming young adults and there was a problem with lack of resources, and I acknowledged to the editor that there was no conversation about teenagers with autism. And so I've done a couple different things to that extent in writing, But Kevin, shout out to my husband, who's also listening to this, tells me probably on a weekly basis that I have a book in my head that I need to write. And one day, I'm sure I will.
An old preacher would say, you got a book that's in your belly. There's a fire in your belly and it's got to come out. Or another, an old prophet would say, you got a fire in your bones and it's got to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a place for that.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful you're sharing it here, except you've made me a ball of mess.
I would like to take just 1 minute. I want to make sure it's clear. If you, dear listener, know someone in your life who is a sibling of a person with a significant physical, intellectual, or developmental disability, please connect with them and love on them to the best of your ability. Often we talk about the children themselves. Often we talk about the parents of children with disabilities. But it is the siblings who carry the responsibility for the next generation. I talked to a mom recently who has twin girls. They're 8 years old. One is neurotypical. The other has cystic fibrosis and multiple sclerosis. And I was talking to her about my experience as a sibling of a child with a significant disability. And she said, I think about that all the time, what it's like for my other daughter who is normal, quote unquote. But if I have a daughter with a scrape on her knee or a daughter with a broken arm, who am I going to tend to first? And that is often the mindset. Mm-hmm. And so check in on those families. Do something extra special for that sibling. Show them that you care. Ask them how they're doing. The siblings of individuals with significant disabilities need our support actively and our prayers.
Okay, let's pivot a little bit.
Please.
Because you mentioned a couple other pivots. And so I'm going to come to this time when you headed off to college. And you spoke about that in pretty colorful terminology. Like, this is when I became Ren, becoming Ren, the journey to do that. And then you also mentioned your trip to, around your trip to Europe. You described it as a fantasy of finding a new life.
Yeah. That's a good line. Who wrote that?
I bet you did at some point. You said it.
Yeah.
I just wrote it down. But what were you okay with bringing along from who you were? How was that going to be a part of this new person that you were seeking to become?
Sure. So the fantasy that I would often think about, the daydream as a child, stemmed from my favorite book as a little one, which was Madeline. I wanted to be in Paris. I wanted to live in Europe. It seemed so colorful and extravagant and elegant and everything that was the opposite of my experience as a child. And so by the time I was a junior in high school, I raised $3,000 by working 2 jobs when I was in high school to go to France because my dad said that his money didn't go to France. And so shout out to Dad. And so I raised all this money. I went to France. It was amazing. I loved going to France, Switzerland, and Italy when I was in high school on a high school trip for 10 days. And so that was affirming to me that I wanted to live in Europe, which was my grand dream as a child. I pursued a second degree at Mizzou in international studies with an emphasis in European studies. And a requirement was to study abroad in Europe. I don't think that was a coincidence that I double majored in that. But I lived in Brussels, Belgium for the summer. And what I took with me was 2 suitcases and a plan, 22 students that I spent the summer with who were also in journalism school at Mizzou. And I wanted to pursue my dream. I wrote for a wire service that focused on social justice issues. It was called the Interpress Service. What they do is put out wire stories that then are translated in 27 languages. I wrote weekly articles for that service, one of which was read at the United Nations, which was a huge moment for me about 6 weeks into that internship. And I realized at about that point, when that article was read at the Women's Council, which was incredible, that I missed what the life that I had was in Missouri. And while I loved Europe and loved Je parle français un peu et très vite, like I loved the whole cultural experience of living in Europe, I knew that I wanted to be home. And that was just as deeply transformative for me as anything else. So many times we tell young people, figure out what you want to do. I say, figure out what you don't want to do. It is a gift to yourself to do the moonshot moment when you're 21 so that you don't spend the rest of your life wondering. I lived in Europe. I loved it for a while. Then I wanted to go home. And that was a gift from my life for the rest of my life. And what I wanted also when I went to Europe was I wanted clarity that this really was the kind of work I wanted to do. I wanted to live internationally. I wanted to cover women's rights issues. I wanted to travel internationally. And I realized I was more of a 3 to 4 weeker, not months at a time. And that was, again, a gift to myself. When I came home, I had that clarity, which gave me direction in that senior year of college of the kind of skills I needed to gain to get the job that I wanted to have when I graduated. And I achieved those goals. And so I also knew like the life that I had in Springfield, that was the life I wanted to have. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a partner who would choose me. I had experienced a breakup, as one often does during a life transformation. And that it coincided with me also traveling to Europe, and that was extra clarity of the kind of partner I needed and the kind of man that God wanted for me. And so when I met Kevin 6 months later, there was intense clarity of the values of the partner that I wanted. And so on the other side of coming back to America at the end of that summer, that girl who landed in the Springfield airport was pretty similar to me right now. When I find a direction, I chase it. Clarity is one of my strengths.
Yeah. That's incredible. And that's a real gift to have clarity. So here's a fun question, and then I'm going to come back to a more meaningful question. But this could also be meaningful. You said your first date with Kevin was for a playoff football game. Do you remember who was playing?
Yes. The Steelers, and Kevin will know. What team did Tim Tebow play for in 2011?
The Denver Broncos.
Yes, that was it. Because Kevin and I both don't like Tim Tebow. And that was the joke that he sent me after the game. He was like, well, the Broncos won, but I still hate Tim Tebow. And that made me laugh. And I got that text message when I was on the phone with my best friend saying, well, that guy's not going to work out. So... And we laugh about this now. And I share this also as encouragement. Even if you have a terrible first impression or first date, they can be wonderful people. Yeah. And a fulfilling relationship. And so we ate chips and salsa. I talked the whole time. Kevin remembers only one line from our conversation, which was 2 hours long, which was, I told him I'm a black sheep in a white sheep world. And he thinks that's so funny. And he gave me the most awkward hug at the end of our date. And it was a mess. It was a mess. But by date 3, we were picking out the names of our children. So shout out to Kevin for the greatest turnaround comeback in history. And I'm obsessed with my husband. He's the best. The best. The greatest blessing of my life is Kevin Michael Luebbering. He's incredible.
That's a fantastic story.
Thank you.
That is great. Encouragement to all of us. So now you're a sister, a daughter, a mom, a wife. And really, I mean, that movement when you went to college to become Ren, I wonder, who are you becoming now? What is your next becoming?
Jason, in my work, in my job now, which is I'm the marketing manager for Springfield Public Schools. I'm also a freelance writer for a variety of magazines. Like I said, I'm a writer and I'm good at it. I'm usually the one who asks poignant questions that people have to think about, so that's disrespectful. Who am I becoming now? I think I am becoming the woman who pursues God relentlessly and continues to share his hope in the world. There is so much darkness all the time within our culture, within our feeds on social media, within our conversations. There is darkness in all places. And I choose to share hope, and I choose to aim for the highest of hopes. And so what I want to keep doing and becoming is a person who is loudly declaring the blessings of God in my life. I still get emotional whenever I say my children, because there was a moment in time when I truly gave up that I would ever have a second child. And I still am in awe that I have children, like the baseline blessings of our lives, our breath in our lungs, the sun in the sky, the people who love you. Those foundational blessings, I try not to take for granted, because you believe that good things are possible for you. But I have experienced when good things aren't possible, but things are good within my life. And I want to share that publicly. And I also want to continue to push down the darkness. Within my family, we struggle with mental illness, and through medication, through therapy, which I'm still in, through resources that God provides to us as Americans, as humans, I continue to pursue health in all ways. And so I think I want to be a model for my children of that relentless hope. The line that would go through my head over and over again during fertility treatments was the line from Great is Thy Faithfulness, which is strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. The verse that would play over and over again in my head was, yet I still pursue hope, from Lamentations 3:20. These foundational pieces of believing that good things are possible. I would cry in our Renovate service when we would sing over and over again, you're never going to let me down. I would sob on Sunday mornings, not believing it was possible, but holding on to what is true, which is God will make a way. God will make a way. And so I'm trying to use my gifts to continue to declare that good things are possible, even when things are hard. You have the best possible life that is available to you, but there is still goodness. There is still goodness when you can't get out of bed, when you can't get off the ground. There is still light. There is still hope.
Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate this time. And like I think many of us come to a conversation, we don't always know what we're going to encounter. As Paul describes in 2 Corinthians, we carry around the light of Christ within us. And oftentimes it's in those places where we're broken or wounded or bruised. It's in the soft spaces that the light of Christ can come out and be shared with others. So thank you for sharing the fullness of your story, those dark places and those very, very bright places, and the hope that's within you. Thank you for sharing that today.
You're welcome.
Dear listeners, Ren Luebbering is one very cool person. And what a great line. I have a fantasy of finding a new life. Sometimes that is God's dream that he plants within us.
And dreams come true.
Yeah, they do. A big thank you to Ren Luebbering for coming in today and sharing her story. In listening to Ren, I hope that you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged. She gave us many points to think about, both for inspiration and many points of challenge. And if in listening to Ren, you yourself find yourself in a place where you need some help, be bold and courageous to reach out to somebody so that you can have the hope and the light of Christ that she talks about. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is the executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. We're so glad that you've tuned in today. May the Lord bless you, and until next time.